Vietnam's import and export of goods in the first 7 months of 2025, strong growth, positive contribution to the economy. According to the latest data from the General Statistics Office, Ministry of Finance, Vietnam's import and export activities in July 2025 had a strong recovery after a slight decrease in June. Import and export turnover in July reached $82.27 billion, up 8% over the previous month and up 16.8% over the same period in 2024. As a result, the total import and export turnover in the first 7 months of 2025 reached $514.7 billion, up 16.3% over the same period last year, of which exports increased by 14.8% and imports increased by 17.9%. Export of goods, steady growth. Export turnover of goods in July 2025 reached $42.27 billion, up 6.9% over the previous month, of which domestic economic sector reached $8.95 billion, up 3.5%. Foreign invested sector, FDI, including crude oil, reached $33.32 billion, up 7.9%. Compared to the same period last year, July exports increased by 16%, of which domestic economic sector decreased by 10.3%. FDI sector increased sharply by 25.9%. In the first 7 months of the year, export turnover reached $262.44 billion, up 14.8%, of which domestic economic sector reached $67.48 billion, up 6.7%, accounting for 25.7% of total turnover. FDI sector reached $194.96 billion, up 17.9%, accounting for 74.3%. Notably, there were 28 export items with turnover of over $1 billion, accounting for 91.7% of total export turnover, of which 9 items exceeded the $5 billion mark, accounting for 72.3%. Regarding the structure of export goods, commodity group value, billion USD, proportion, percent. Processing industry 232.3788.6. Agricultural and forestry products 22.48.5. Aquatic products 6.082.3. Fuel and minerals 1.590.6. Import of goods, strong recovery. Import turnover in July 2025 reached $40 billion, up 9.1% compared to the previous month, of which domestic economic sector reached $11.29 billion, up 4.6%. FDI sector reached $28.71 billion, up 11%. Compared to the same period last year, imports in July increased by 17.8%, of which domestic economic sector decreased by 5%. FDI sector increased sharply by 30%. In the first 7 months of the year, import turnover reached $252.26 billion, up 17.9%, of which domestic economic sector reached $84.07 billion, up 8%. FDI sector reached $168.19 billion, up 23.6%. There were 36 imported items with a value of over $1 billion, accounting for 90.5% of total import turnover, of which 9 items exceeded the $5 billion mark, accounting for 64.1%. Key import-export markets. In the first 7 months of 2025, the United States continued to be Vietnam's largest export market with a turnover of $85.1 billion. China was the largest import market with a turnover of $101.5 billion. Trade balance with major markets. Market trade surplus/trade deficit value, billion USD growth percent. United States trade surplus 74.6 plus 28.6. EU trade surplus 22.3 plus 9.9. Japan trade surplus 1.3 plus 21.0. China trade deficit 66.5 plus 41.1. Korea trade deficit 17.4 minus 0.2. ASEAN trade deficit 8.5 plus 63.0. Trade balance. Trade surplus continues to be maintained. In July 2025, Vietnam had a trade surplus of $2.27 billion US. In the first 7 months, the trade surplus reached $10.18 billion US, lower than the $14.63 billion US in the same period last year. Of which, the domestic economic sector had a trade deficit of $16.6 billion US. The FDI sector had a trade surplus of $26.78 billion US. Although the trade surplus decreased compared to the previous year, it still showed stability in trade activities, contributing to strengthening foreign exchange reserves and supporting monetary policy. The above figures are according to source, General Statistics Office. Thank you for watching the video.